the debate that went on at the UN, it was like, these developed rich countries, those who define values.
Paul Kagame just said Western aid to Africa is a lie. Dr. Arikana exposed secret deals forced on African leaders. Captain Traoré vowed to fight the West head-on. But what do these three know that's shaking Western power to its core? And why is their unity so dangerous? And why are they so brave? Let's find out. When Paul Kagame speaks, he doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't wave a flag. But in a single sentence, he can cause panic across diplomatic corridors in Paris, Brussels, and Washington. And that's exactly what he did. Not with threats, but with cold, measured truth.
This question can only be asked in Africa, not in any other region of this world. Aid is more political than anything else.
It wasn't just a critique. It was a direct challenge to the entire framework of Western African relations. For decades, Western powers have hidden behind the language of aid and development. The World Bank, USAID, IMF packages, European Union grants, all branded with noble intentions, but tied with invisible chains. Kagame pulled the curtain back and said what many have whispered but few have dared to voice. This was never about partnership. It was always about control. He accused Western donors of using aid not to build Africa, but to bend it to their will. A hospital project delayed unless the government supports a UN resolution. A budget grant withheld until an African president agrees to privatize water or deregulate mining. Humanitarian language backed by hard leverage. But Kagame didn't stop there. He turned inward, toward Africa's elite. He spoke of presidents and ministers flying to global summits not to negotiate but to pose, to take smiling photos with G7 leaders, to be seen, not to speak. It's performative, he suggested, a show.
For me, when I'm watching on television and I find our leaders who should have been working together all along to address these problems that commonly affect their countries, wait until they are invited to go to Europe to sit there and just... In fact, the image it gives is that we are not there to even address these problems. We are there for a photo opportunity. We are happy to sit there in Paris with the president of France and just talk about addressing problems.
That kind of honesty doesn't come without cost. Western media have long accused Kagame of being authoritarian, closed, or uncooperative. But to many Africans, especially a younger generation sick of waiting, his bluntness is refreshing. Because he's not asking for aid, he's asking for honesty. He questions the very foundation on which modern African diplomacy is built. If neither the giver nor the receiver believes in the partnership, why keep up the act? And this is where Kagame becomes dangerous, not because he has the largest army, not because he threatens war, but because he's telling other African leaders, you don't have to play the game anymore. In a continent where image has often replaced substance, Kagame's speech was an act of rebellion. He didn't call for weapons, he called for self-respect. And that, ironically, is more threatening to the West than bullets, because if one leader can stand on a global stage and say the partnerships are fake and still survive, it sets a precedent. Others might follow. And that's what's already beginning to happen. You see, Kagame revealed the illusion, the surface-level diplomacy that's more about choreography than change. But what happens when someone digs deeper, past the diplomacy, and into the documents? The actual contracts and threats that keep Africa tied? That's exactly what Dr. Arikana did. She wasn't looking at cameras or photo ops, she was looking at the fine print. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. If Paul Kagame exposed the lie behind Western partnerships, then Dr. Arikana Chihombori exposed the trap behind them, buried not in speeches, but in signed documents, secret clauses, and threats disguised as diplomacy. Dr. Arikana wasn't a rebel general. She wasn't a populist firebrand. She was the former African Union ambassador to the United States, a career diplomat with access to the inner machinery of global power. And what she saw from that vantage point horrified her. She discovered that modern African diplomacy wasn't just about being ignored, it was about being coerced. She revealed a quiet but brutal system. African leaders, often desperate for funding, are present with agreements that look like cooperation, but function as colonization. They're told to sign, and warned not to say no. According to Arikana, these aren't just trade deals or development grants, these are economic death sentences. Hidden inside the fine print are clauses that hand over oil blocks, mineral rights, telecom sectors, and even military access for pennies on the dollar, or nothing at all. And what happens if a president refuses? Dr. Arikana says the answer is clear. Destabilization, isolation, character assassination, sometimes worse. She described it as a modern scramble for Africa, except this time, the colonizers wear suits and deliver ultimatums in hotel boardrooms, not military bases. The battlefield isn't the savannah, it's the signature line on a contract. She pointed out how the French colonial pact still haunts West Africa, forcing former colonies to deposit their reserves in France's central bank. She questioned why Africa's most resource-rich countries remain the most indebted. Why nations blessed with gold, oil, and cobalt must still beg for road-building loans from countries with none of those things.
Our leaders are fully aware of the enemies to Africa's development, and yet somehow they're incapable of addressing them. We know when it comes to West Africa, the document that African countries were made to sign as they attained their quote-unquote independence, the document that's labeled the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. On one hand, we are giving you your independence, but on the other hand, we want you to sign this document, agreeing to continue to be colonized. And if you choose not to sign this document, in my pocket, I have a gun that has your name. So it is that Guinea and Mali, they chose not to sign the document. History tells us that France moved into those countries, poured concrete into the sewage pipes, destroyed schools, hospitals, roads, anything that could be destroyed, they destroyed. Anything that they could pick up and take back with them to France, they took. According to President Mugabe, they even took the last pencil.
But she didn't stop at criticism. She named the mechanism. She spoke of the economic hitman model, a term coined by whistleblowers, where a Western government or financial institution pressures an African head of state to agree to unfair terms. If he agrees, he gets praise, maybe a statue in some Western capital. If he refuses, the crisis begins. A military uprising, a wave of unrest, a foreign-backed opposition movement, or sanctions so severe they starve the country into compliance. And if he dares to speak about it, he becomes a dictator in the eyes of the international media, no matter how democratic he is at home. Dr. Arikana mentioned that most African leaders are aware of this game. They play along not because they are fooled, but because they're afraid. Afraid of being overthrown, of being isolated, of being the next headline, African strongman toppled. She referenced countless examples, from leaders in the Sahel who resisted French control, to others who simply tried to nationalize their resources and were met with immediate economic collapse. The message is consistent. You may have independence on paper, but not in practice. And this is why her message became so dangerous. Because it wasn't just a political statement. It was an instruction manual, a decoded map of how modern colonization functions through contracts, not chains. And once that knowledge spreads, it becomes harder for those in power to hide behind jargon and PR. But Dr. Arikana did more than speak. She aligned herself with others who had already refused to sign. She pointed to the new generation of African leaders, unbought, uninvited to Western summits, and unapologetic. Leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré. To her, Traoré wasn't a problem. He was proof. Proof that Africa could say no, that a country could refuse to sign, expel foreign forces, nationalize wealth, and still stand. Shaken, yes, but not defeated. She warned that what happened to Traoré, the backlash, the isolation, the attempted coups, wasn't random. It was a punishment, and it was predictable. Which begs a disturbing question. How many African presidents have signed away their country's future, not out of greed, but out of fear? Dr. Arikana made it clear. True independence won't come through speeches or votes. It will come through rejection. Rejection of contracts, conditions, and foreign control. And if Africa wants that independence, it must be willing to endure what comes next. The pressure, the attacks, the consequences of defiance. And that's exactly what Ibrahim Traoré is doing. He didn't just say no. He said never again, and prepared his country for the war that would follow. If Paul Kagame dismantled the illusion of partnership and Dr. Arikana exposed the trap behind the handshake, then Captain Ibrahim Traoré did something far more dangerous. He declared war on the entire system. Not metaphorically, not diplomatically. He used the words the West fears most. We will fight for true independence. We will fight against them. There was no ambiguity, no polished language, no calls for reform. What Traoré is doing in Burkina Faso is not reform. It's a revolution, designed not to negotiate better terms with the West, but to eliminate their terms. And unlike many African leaders who speak boldly abroad and compromise quietly at home, Traoré is applying pressure from within. The fight isn't symbolic, it's institutional, military, and economic. He's not waiting for permission to be sovereign. He's acting like he already is.
When you go to our states, our lands are riddled with holes, everywhere in search of precious metals like gold, but often there isn't even the slightest accessible road to reach the areas where they exploit gold, let alone some basic social services. That's why we decided to revolt and take the destiny of our countries into our own hands. There are many other examples. But when we decided to do so, well, we were approached by some armchair slaves to deliver the message of their master, because they had created this kind of polymer chain that rises to the head of our states to serve them. And we came to break the chain. And it's inconceivable for them. They approached us and asked us to fall in line, to become part of the elite that must lead Africa. Because they have a trained and conditioned elite that they must follow, who are embedded in that chain. We refused Baofat to fall in line with them. And from then on, hostilities began. They have infiltrated our areas with several mercenaries, trainers. Agents have descended into the Sahel, hoping to carry out barbaric, cowardly attacks against our populations, hoping to incite them to revolt. In addition to these on-the-ground attacks, communication attacks, manipulation, and disinformation are rampant in their ranks. But the people of the Sahel have understood, and never again will they be manipulated. They know where they come from, they know what they are doing, and they know where they are going. We will no longer allow this. People are awake and fighting today, not for ourselves, but for future generations. And thank you all for the fight that is being waged. This never makes us cry. We will not tremble. We will face it. We will fight for true independence, for our freedom.
From the moment he rose to power in 2022, Traoré made it clear. This was not going to be another cycle of hopeful speeches followed by IMF agreements. One of his first moves was to expel French troops, tearing down the last remnants of military dependency. Then came the closure of French-backed media outlets, long accused of narrative manipulation. And then the call went out, not to Paris or Washington, but to fellow African nations ready to break the same chains. Under Traoré, Burkina Faso didn't just leave ECOWAS. It actively began building a new alliance with Mali and Niger, rejecting the political pressures of a West-aligned regional bloc. What the West called instability, Traoré called reconstruction. What Western analysts labeled military rule, many Africans saw as liberation from comprador Democrats who sold sovereignty in exchange for summit invitations. But this wasn't just about France. The US also saw the shift and responded, first with rhetoric, then with restrictions, and finally, according to multiple reports, with increased covert activity in the region. Why? Because Traoré's real threat isn't what he says, it's what he inspires. He's young, ideologically grounded, and unafraid. His speeches aren't polished for CNN. They're raw, delivered in uniform, with the unmistakable tone of a man who understands the weight of what he's doing. He speaks of sovereign control of resources, local processing of gold, rebuilding food production without USAID, and ending dependence on Western banks. To the average Burkinabe citizen, these aren't abstract ideals, they're immediate needs. And that's where Traoré's power lies. His revolution aligns with people's hunger, both literal and political. He speaks to mothers paying inflated prices for imported food while local farms rot. He speaks to miners digging up gold that they'll never see the profit of. He speaks to the youth, the same youth who once saw Europe as their only escape, now chanting La patrie ou la mort, homeland or death in the streets. Traoré is transforming Burkina Faso's military not just as a defense force but as a productive institution. Under his command, the armed forces have engaged in agriculture, road construction, and industrial projects. In a nation where infrastructure was always a donor-driven promise, this is a reversal of dependency at the structural level. No loans, no foreign consultants, just national will. But with such boldness comes retaliation. Since Traoré's rise, Burkina Faso has faced international isolation. Western ambassadors were recalled. Aid packages were frozen. Media coverage became a coordinated campaign of demonization. Words like dictator, junta, and autocrat flooded Western outlets. But inside Africa, a different word was echoing louder: leader. And Traoré isn't leading alone. He's building solidarity across Africa with others who are beginning to see that sovereignty isn't just a slogan. It's a strategy, a hard one, a dangerous one, but increasingly a necessary one. That's why he aligns with Dr. Arikana's vision of rejecting the system that demands compliance. That's why he reinforces Kagame's call to abandon fake partnerships. But unlike them, Traoré isn't just diagnosing the problem. He's challenging it in real time, on the ground, with real costs and real consequences. Some compare him to Sankara, but Traoré doesn't echo Sankara's speeches. He's continuing what Sankara was stopped from finishing, and that's what makes him a serious threat to the global order. Because this isn't about Burkina Faso anymore. It's about a precedent. If one country can stand up, others might follow. If Traoré survives, politically, economically, and militarily, then the illusion that Africa must depend on the West will collapse. That's why the final piece of the puzzle isn't what Traoré, Kagame, or Arikana do individually. It's what their alignment makes possible when their efforts converge. The question now is no longer, will they fight back? It's what happens when they fight back together. 3 voices, 3 approaches, 3 battlegrounds. Paul Kagame tears off the West's diplomatic mask. Dr. Arikana traces the chain to the signatures beneath it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré smashes the lock at the gate. Individually, they disrupt. Together, they destabilize the very architecture of neocolonialism. And this is where the West starts to panic, not at what they say, but at what their alignment could build. Because this isn't just political rhetoric anymore. What we're witnessing is the slow formation of an alternative African order, a defiant, self-defined, pan-African front, rooted not in theory, but in coordinated action. For the first time in decades, a pathway is emerging where African states stop reacting to Western plans and start designing their own, with each other. The old colonial strategy of divide and rule relied on keeping African voices separate. One leader was manageable, one country could be sanctioned. But a coalition, that's a different problem entirely. And now it's forming. Each of the three leaders brings a vital pillar to the table. Kagame offers tactical clarity. He's mastered the language of power and understands how to challenge the West without inviting easy retaliation. He's walked through the fire of donor pressure and built one of Africa's most stable states by ignoring the conventional wisdom that Africa must remain aid-dependent to survive. In this new axis, Kagame is the strategist, the one who understands how to navigate the international arena while still punching holes in its logic. Dr. Arikana brings institutional memory and legal foresight. She doesn't deal in slogans, she deals in documents, charters, and historical patterns. Her insights cut through emotional appeals and expose the very contracts and treaties that have trapped African nations in exploitative relationships. If this alliance is to endure, it will need someone who understands the machinery of soft imperialism and how to dismantle it, clause by clause. TRAORÉ provides the spark of irreversible action. He doesn't theorize or ask. He moves. He shows what defiance looks like when implemented at the state level. In the trio, he's the insurgent energy, the embodiment of risk, the proof that a country can reject Western domination and continue to breathe, govern, and lead. But this trio isn't just defined by what they oppose. They are increasingly defined by what they are building. And that's the part that frightens their opponents the most. In other words, Africa is now talking about sovereignty as a complete ecosystem: economic, military, political, and cultural. And the cultural front is just as critical. These leaders are not just rejecting foreign influence, they're reviving African dignity, reawakening African political consciousness. They are speaking a language of purpose, pride, and resistance that resonates deeply with the continent's youth, the demographic that makes up more than 60% of Africa's population. And here's the real threat: it's contagious. Once people realize they don't have to accept Western narratives of progress, once they see leaders who are surviving and even thriving outside that system, the hunger for change becomes irreversible. That's what makes this trio revolutionary, not because they claim to have all the answers, but because they've proven the current system is not the only option. Western institutions are already responding with panic, more negative headlines, more pressure from international lenders, more sudden offers of cooperation as a last-minute containment strategy. But the narrative is slipping, because these three aren't isolated anymore. We are entering a phase where the network effect begins. One example leads to another. One leader inspires the next. One country's refusal gives strength to its neighbor's hesitation. And the West is running out of tools to suppress this momentum without exposing its contradictions. But what happens next depends not just on these three, but on those watching them. Will other leaders stay silent, fearing economic backlash? Or will they start speaking this new language of coordinated resistance, strategic sovereignty, and African-first policy? Let us know in the comment section. Is it the only road to Africa's true independence? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.